If you have a total portfolio balance of at least $700,000 and you are looking to retire early, then this video is for you. And specifically, if you are interested to figure out how much can your portfolio in retirement produce in the form of income, we're going to dive right into that. So let's get into it. We have David and Susan here. David and Susan are both 58 years old. Currently, they're working. David's salary is $67,000 a year, and Susan's salary is $48,000 a year. Susan has a pension, and so in retirement, she will have income from that pension in the amount of $19,000 per year. And then we have their Social Security benefit here. Going into their savings, currently, David has a simple IRA where he puts away 3% and is matched at 3%. And Susan has a traditional IRA, and currently she's putting away $4,000 into that IRA every year. Going into their expenses pre-retirement, they have expenses in the amount of $6,000 per month. And then getting into their net worth, we can see here that we have this $702,000 portfolio. David's simple IRA has $355,000 in it. Susan's IRA has $192,000 in it. And then they have a joint taxable account with $155,000 in that account. They also have their bank and a loan on their primary residence here, but we aren't going to get into any of this. We're just going to focus here on their portfolio. Going into their goals, we can see here that they would like to retire at the age of 65, preferably earlier if they can swing it. Their monthly retirement expense goal is $5,250, and then we're going to assume the annual retirement health cost in the amount of $6,400 for both David and Susan. That's each. So going into their retirement analysis, we can see initially with everything that we have here, they have a 100% probability of success with $2.1 million in ending assets. And so what's important to note here is there's going to be a variety of different things that play into how much income in retirement will David and Susan have. And specifically, it falls into three buckets. When we think about income, it's important to look at all of our income. So bucket number one here would be they're going to have portfolio income. How much income can this $700,000 portfolio generate every year? In addition to that, we mentioned that they're going to have that Social Security benefit. So bucket number two is their Social Security benefit. Combined, how much income will this produce every year? And then finally, they're going to have other income. And for David and Susan, Susan has that pension in the amount of $19,000 every year. But other income for you can be a variety of things, whether that's a pension, passive income, or other investments that you may have. So let's dive into their investments here. And currently today, we can see that they have a 35-65 portfolio. 35% equity, 65% fixed income, with a hypothetical annual rate of return of 6.2%. So we're going to do a couple things here. We're going to look at what would it look like if they had a conservative portfolio, both pre-retirement and in retirement. What would our hypothetical annual return be? And we can see here with a conservative allocation, our hypothetical annual return is 6.2%. Looking at this 6.2%, if we take $700,000, we can see here that that will equate to $43,400 every year, or $3,616 per month. It's important to note that we have a standard deviation of 6.7% with our conservative portfolio. Now, what if we go to a moderate portfolio? What would a moderate portfolio do in terms of hypothetical return? We can see here that our annual return is 8.2%. So if we take our moderate 8.2% portfolio, that's $57,400 per year, or $4,783 per month. So now let's go to a growth portfolio. We can see here that a growth portfolio has a hypothetical annual return of 8.9%. or $62,300 per year, or $5,191 per month. And so if we recall, our retirement expenses, our goal in retirement is to spend $5,250. We can see that right here under our goals. So if we think about how does our allocation impact our retirement income from our portfolio? With the growth, again, we are at $5,191 per month. With a moderate portfolio at $4,783 per month. And then with a conservative portfolio, $3,616 per month. So if we look at these different allocations, and then we look at the income that we need in retirement, our expenses are still going to be higher than that of the income we're bringing in from our portfolio. But here's the catch. We don't want to be too growth focused in retirement. Why? Because again, we are pulling money from our portfolio. We are relying on our portfolio to give us income in retirement. And therefore, our risk tolerance is much lower in retirement than pre-retirement. So when we think about our allocation, we need to be mindful of this. So maybe in retirement, and obviously this is going to be different for each account. Typically, our taxable account is going to be more conservative, and our tax deferred, our qualified accounts are going to be a little bit more aggressive. Why? Because we are using the traditional withdrawal order. We're going to pull from our taxable accounts first, then our traditional IRAs, our pre-tax retirement accounts, and then finally, if applicable, we'll pull from our Roth IRA. So looking at this, it is likely that we're going to be more conservative in our taxable account and then a little bit more aggressive in our pre-tax retirement accounts. So let's just assume that for the sake of this example, our portfolio allocation across all of our accounts is a moderate allocation. And we can see here under the investments that a moderate allocation is that hypothetical 8.2% annual return. Again, for a total of $57,400 per year in income, assuming that $700,000 portfolio, or $4,783 a month. So we have an income gap of $467 a month, meaning our expenses exceed the income that our portfolio will generate by $467 per month. And so this is where we look at the other income. Like we said, we will have other income in retirement. We will have our Social Security benefit, and we will have that pension from Susan. So our pension is $19,000 per year. It is important to note that for this particular pension, it is adjusted for the cost of living. And so we have that cost of living adjustment. So that equates to $1,583 per month. So we can see here between our portfolio income and that pension, we will have an income surplus every single month. We also have to be mindful of our Social Security benefit. Now, our Social Security benefit, combined at full retirement age, we can see here that we have $64,743 per year in the form of our Social Security benefit, or $5,395.25 per month. And if we collect this at the age of 62, we can see here that we'll have $49,440 per year, or $4,120 per month. And so the point here is when we think about income, when we think about how much can our $700,000 portfolio produce in the form of income every year in retirement, yes, we need to look at that. How are we allocated and how does that impact our portfolio income? But we also need to think about our other income that we will have in retirement. In addition to that, we need to be aware and mindful of what does this look like from a tax perspective. If we're pulling from those pre-tax retirement accounts, obviously we're going to have a tax consequence there. So what does that look like? And this brings me in to the cash flows. We can see here, if we look at our cash flow summary, we can see our income inflows starting today and going through retirement. And then we can look at our total expenses and tax payment. And what we can see here is obviously in our working years, from the age of 58, assuming we retire at the age of 65, we have a pretty hefty tax payment. And then we retire. And for a couple years here, our tax payment decreases substantially. Why? Because we don't have any income, and our only income at the age of 65 and 66 is portfolio income. And then our Social Security benefit kicks in. And we can see that, yes, our tax payment is pretty steady, and our tax payment is pretty steady and low until our RMDs kick in. And we can see here in the year 2042, at the age of 75 for both David and Susan, RMDs will kick in. And we can see here that our total plan distribution is in the amount of $67,000+ per year starting in 2042 and then going through the end of our plan. And as a result, our tax payment goes from $800, $900, $1,000 to $15,000+. But we can also see that starting today and going to the age of 65, we have spend from unsaved cash flows. So we have excess income here that we can either put into our investments, we can save it for whatever it may be, or we can spend that. And then we see from 65 until our RMDs, we have negative net flows, especially in 2032 and 2033 when we are not working and we are also not collecting our Social Security benefit. And then once we collect that Social Security benefit, we have negative net flows, yes, but much less than that of those 2 gap years. And then that continues until the age of 75. So going back to our retirement analysis, there's a variety of things that we need to be mindful of relative to how much income will this $700,000 portfolio produce in retirement. But specific to that $700,000, 2 things that we want to keep in mind specifically is how are we allocated and what is our hypothetical annual return? And then where are those assets held? Are they in a taxable account? Are they in a pre-tax retirement account? Or are they in a tax-free Roth account? Why? Because obviously, depending on your asset location, the tax consequence around that money that portfolio is producing will be much different. But lastly, let's look at our ending assets here. We know that today we have $700,000 in investments. And at the age of 90, at the end of our plan, we see here that we end our plan with $2.1 million. So we have substantial asset growth. Now, why is this? Well, in retirement, we mentioned that our monthly expenses were $5,250. And if we take a moderate portfolio, that moderate portfolio will produce, assuming that hypothetical 8.2% annual return, $4,783 per month in growth in income. And so our gap there is $467 a month. But we also have our Social Security benefit, plus our pension. Therefore, we have a surplus. We have positive spend from unsaved cash flows each and every year, with the exception of those few years that we looked at. And so that means our portfolio is continuously compounding, minus just those couple years that we saw in our cash flows. And this is more evident when we look at our withdrawal rate here. If we go to our withdrawal rate, we see that this is substantially low for a lot of retirement. And then even once we start pulling from our portfolio, the only reason we're pulling from our portfolio is because we're required to, in the form of those required minimum distributions. So see, for David and Susan, for their expenses versus their income in retirement, they're in a really good spot. Now, if you're interested in doing a very similar plan for your unique situation, where you can go through, hey, this is my portfolio balance, and this is what I'm thinking about, this is my retirement goal, then I invite you to click the link in the description, create your free retirement plan, and you can get started with a plan just like this. You can go through, what does it look like if we retire at 62 or 65 or 67? What does it look like if instead of spending $5,250 a month, what if we spend $6,000 a month? What does it look like if pre-retirement we have a growth allocation, but in retirement we have a conservative allocation? What does it look like if we just move our allocations today to that moderate portfolio? You can go through all of these different scenarios with this plan. So click that link. We'll see you there. And until next time, thank you so much. Bye-bye.